The Admiral smiled and leaned forward. "What's your kill count, old man?" A few officers laughed. Not loudly, but enough. The old man stayed quiet. His hands didn't shake. His face didn't change. He had been silent for years. The room expected anger or embarrassment. Instead, they got calm. Slowly, the old man looked up, and suddenly, the laughter stopped, because his eyes didn't belong to a weak man. They belonged to someone who had seen too much. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, not proud, not broken, just honest. One sentence. That's all it took. The Admiral's smile faded. The officers looked down, and the room learned a lesson no rank could teach. Some men don't count kills. They count the weight they carry. The conference room felt cold despite the polished wood table and warm lights overhead. Flags stood tall in the corners. Medals shimmered on uniforms. Authority lived in every detail. At the center of the room sat an old man. He didn't wear a uniform. No medals. No rank on his chest. Just a simple maroon sweater, sleeves slightly worn, hands folded calmly on the table. Around him stood officers, young, sharp, confident. Their boots were polished, their backs straight. They whispered among themselves, glancing at the old man with curiosity mixed with quiet amusement. Who invited him? Was he some retired clerk? A guest speaker, maybe? At the head of the table sat the Admiral. Tall, decorated, powerful. He had commanded fleets, given orders that moved thousands of men. His presence alone demanded respect. Tonight, he looked relaxed, almost entertained. The briefing had ended. The serious talk was over. That's when a mood shifted. The Admiral leaned back his chair, crossed his arms, and smiled. Not a cruel smile. Not yet. His eyes moved to the old man. "So," he said casually, voice echoing lightly in the room, "what was it you did in the service again?" The old man raised his eyes slowly. "Infantry," he replied quietly. A few officers exchanged looks. "Infantry. Old. Civilian clothes." The Admiral's smile widened. "Well," he chuckled, tapping his fingers on the table, "that must have been interesting." A pause. Then he said it, almost joking, almost harmless. "So tell me," the Admiral asked, loud enough for everyone to hear, "what's your kill count, old man?" For half a second, the room froze. Then came the laughter. Not roaring laughter. Just enough. A smirk here. A suppressed chuckle there. One young officer leaned toward another and whispered something. Another shook his head, amused. The question hung in the air like smoke. The old man didn't react. He didn't stiffen, didn't clench his fists, didn't look offended. He simply looked down at the table. The Admiral watched him, expecting something, anger, maybe embarrassment, something entertaining. But the old man stayed still. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. The laughter died on its own. Something about his stillness felt wrong. This wasn't weakness. It was control. The old man's fingers slowly loosened, then folded again. His breathing remained steady, like someone who had learned long ago how to stay calm while chaos screamed around him. The officers began to feel it too. That uncomfortable shift. That quiet pressure. One officer cleared his throat. Another straightened his posture. The Admiral's smile faded just a little. The old man finally lifted his eyes. And when he did, the room changed. Those eyes didn't belong to a harmless retiree. They were old, but sharp. Tired, but alert. Eyes that had watched friends fall. Eyes that had stared down fear and learned its name. He didn't look at the Admiral with anger. He looked at him with something worse. Understanding. And that's when everyone realized. The joke had gone too far. The Admiral opened his mouth, about to say something else. But the old man spoke first. Softly, calmly, and with a weight that pressed down on every man in the room. The old man didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He didn't try to command attention. He already had it. "I don't know," he said quietly. The words landed softly, almost gently. A few officers frowned. "Don't know?" Was he joking back? The Admiral blinked once, confused more than amused now. "You don't know?" he repeated, a hint of challenge in his tone. "You mean you forgot?" The old man shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "I mean I never counted." A strange stillness crept into the room. The Admiral leaned forward now, elbows on the table. His playful tone was gone. Everyone counts, he said. It's part of the record, part of history. The old man finally turned his full gaze toward him. When you're young, he said calmly, you think numbers make sense of things. He paused. When the shooting starts, numbers disappear. No one laughed this time. One officer swallowed hard. Another shifted his weight. The old man continued, his voice steady, almost instructional, like a man explaining something simple to children. I remember faces, he said. Voices. His eyes drifted, not to the walls, but somewhere far beyond them. I remember a boy who dropped his rifle and raised his hands too late. A man who ran because he thought speed could beat bullets. And one who looked just as scared as I was. The Admiral straightened. This wasn't the A. It's where he had expected. The old man's hands tightened slightly on the edge of the table. I stopped counting after the first night, he went on, because I realized something. He looked back at the Admiral. Every number adds weight, and some weights don't come off. The room felt smaller now. The world map on the wall glowed faintly behind them, its bright lines mocking the simplicity of borders and strategies. One of the younger officers looked down at his boots. Another stared at the old man, eyes wide. The Admiral cleared his throat. So, he said carefully, you're saying you don't remember any of it? The old man almost smiled. I remember too much, he said. That single sentence hit harder than any raised voice could have. He leaned back slightly, as if the memories had already taken their toll. I remember the smell before dawn, he continued. The quiet right before it starts. And the sound that comes after, when it's over. No one interrupted him. No one dared. The Admiral's posture had changed completely now. No smirk. No confidence. Just attention. I learned early, the old man said, that men who talk about kill counts usually haven't seen enough. A sharp breath escaped someone at the back of the room. The old man didn't look at them. This isn't a story about bravery, he added. It's about survival. He stood then, slowly, carefully, but without weakness. When the war ends, he said, the counting doesn't. He tapped his chest lightly. It stays here. The silence that followed was absolute. No whispers. No movement. The Admiral finally spoke, but his voice was different now. Lower. Respectful. I didn't mean any disrespect, he said. The old man nodded once. I know, he replied, but the lesson had already been delivered, and everyone in that room understood. They weren't sitting with an old man. They were sitting with the memory of war itself. No one spoke, not because they were ordered to be silent, but because no one knew what to say. The old man remained standing, hands resting lightly on the back of his chair. He wasn't trying to dominate the room. He didn't need to. The room had already given up its noise. A young officer near the door shifted uncomfortably. He had joined the service only 3 years ago. His training was fresh, his confidence newer. Until a few minutes ago, war had been something he studied in clean diagrams and polished simulations. Now it felt real. Another officer cleared his throat, then stopped himself. It felt wrong to break the silence, like speaking in a graveyard. The Admiral looked around the room. Faces that once showed amusement now showed something else. Respect, reflection, regret. He adjusted his uniform slightly, a nervous habit he hadn't used in years. I've read hundreds of reports, the Admiral said slowly. After-action summaries. Numbers. Charts. His voice echoed softly against the walls. But none of them ever sounded like that. The old man said nothing. He simply listened. That question, the Admiral continued, eyes lowered now, was careless. The word felt heavy. Careless. He looked up at the old man. I owe you an apology. Every officer felt it, the shift. Rank still existed. Authority still mattered. But something deeper had taken control of the room. The old man nodded once. Apology accepted. No speech needed. One of the officers finally spoke. A captain, mid-30s, combat ribbon on his chest. With respect, sir, he said to the Admiral, I think we forget sometimes what those numbers cost. The Admiral didn't interrupt him. Another officer followed. My grandfather served, a lieutenant added quietly. He never talked about it. I used to think that meant he hadn't done much. He paused, swallowing. I think I understand now. The old man's gaze softened, not with pride, but with relief. that someone was listening. The Admiral stepped away from the head of the table and walked slowly toward the old man. Each step echoed. When he stopped, he extended his hand, not as a superior, as a man. "Thank you," the Admiral said, "for reminding us." The old man looked at the hand for a moment, then shook it firmly. "Just remember," he replied, "those who've seen the most usually say the least." The handshake ended. The officers straightened, not out of discipline, but respect. The Admiral turned to the room. "Dismissed," he said, but no one moved immediately. They didn't want to be the first to leave. The old man picked up his coat, folded neatly over the chair. He moved slowly toward the door. As he passed them, officers stepped aside without realizing it, creating a path. Not ordered, instinctive. At the doorway, he stopped, turned. "Train hard," he said simply, "and pray you never have to count." Then he left. The door closed softly behind him. The room remained silent long after. No one checked their phones. No one joked. The world map still glowed on the wall, but felt different now. Less like strategy, more like warning. The Admiral sat down slowly, hands folded where the old man had sat earlier. For the first time that evening, he understood something no briefing could teach. War isn't measured in victories. It's measured in what follows you home. The conference room didn't return to normal, even after the door closed, even after the officers slowly filtered out. Something heavy remained. The Admiral stayed seated long after everyone had left. His fingers rested on the table where the old man's hands had been. The wood was cool, but the memory wasn't. He stared at the glowing world map on the wall. For years, he had seen it as control. Lines, zones, objectives. Now, all he could see were the spaces between them. Empty spaces. The captain who had spoken earlier stood near the doorway, unsure whether to leave. He finally stepped back into the room. "Sir," he said gently, "are you all right?" The Admiral nodded, though he wasn't sure it was true. "I've commanded men into battle," he said quietly. "Signed orders that changed lives." He paused, "but I never carried it the way he does." The captain didn't reply. He didn't need to. The Admiral stood and walked slowly to the window. Outside, the base lights glowed in orderly rows. Everything ran on schedule. Precision. Discipline. War, reduced to efficiency. "Do you know," the Admiral continued, "how many names I've memorized from reports?" The captain shook his head. "None," the Admiral admitted. "Just numbers." He turned back toward the table. "That man," he said, remembered faces. The realization settled deep. The Admiral straightened his uniform, not out of habit now, but humility. From that night forward, meetings changed. Briefings no longer ended with jokes. Questions were asked differently. When young officers spoke about combat, the Admiral listened more than he talked. And when someone mentioned numbers, casualties, confirmed kills, statistics, there was always a pause, a silence, a reminder. Weeks later, the Admiral requested the old man's service record. It was thin. No decorations listed publicly. No heroic summaries. Just years of active duty and an early discharge. He closed the file slowly. Not surprised. Heroes rarely advertise themselves. The Admiral began inviting veterans to speak, not about tactics, but about aftermath, about returning home, about sleep that never quite came back. Some talks were short. Some ended in silence. All of them mattered. One evening, the Admiral stood before a group of new recruits. Their eyes were sharp, eager, untouched. He thought of the old man. "I want you to understand something," he told them. "Combat isn't a story you win." The room listened. "It's something you survive," he continued. "And survival leaves marks." He paused. "Respect those who don't speak about it." The recruits nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing the truth. That night, alone in his quarters, the Admiral looked at his own reflection. Medals gleamed under the light. For the first time, they felt lighter than the memories he now carried. He whispered the old man's words to himself. Every number adds weight. And finally, he understood. Leadership wasn't about commanding the loudest voice. It was about honoring the quiet ones. Months passed. The base continued to function like a machine. Orders issued, drills conducted, schedules followed. On the surface, nothing had changed. But underneath, everything had. The Admiral noticed it first in small ways. Young officers spoke more carefully. Jokes stopped sooner than they used to. And when veterans were present, the room behaved differently, quieter, sharper, respectful. No one mentioned the old man directly. They didn't need to. He had become something else now. A reference point. During one training review, a lieutenant proudly presented simulated results. Targets neutralized. Objectives completed. Clean numbers. The room waited. The Admiral nodded once, then asked a simple question. And after? The lieutenant hesitated. After, sir? What happens to the ones who go home? The Admiral asked calmly. The lieutenant didn't have an answer. Neither did the room. But the question stayed. Years later, the Admiral retired. On his final day, the base held a quiet farewell. No grand ceremony. No speeches filled with glory. Just a handshake. A salute. In respect. As he packed his office, he found an old notebook tucked into a drawer. Inside, written on the first page, were a few words he didn't remember writing. Some men don't count kills. They carry them. He closed the notebook slowly. Outside the gate, civilian life waited. Quieter. Slower. On his way home, he stopped at a small roadside cafe. Nothing special. Just coffee and silence. In the corner, he saw an elderly man sitting alone. Gray hair. Worn sweater. Hands folded calmly. For a moment, the Admiral's breath caught. It wasn't him. But it could have been. The Admiral ordered coffee and sat down, letting the silence settle around him. That's when he understood the final lesson. Wars don't end when battles stop. They end when the last memory fades. And for some men, they never do. The Admiral finished his coffee, stood, and left a tip larger than necessary. As he walked away, he passed a group of young people laughing loudly, careless, untouched. He didn't judge them. He hoped they'd never have to understand. Far away, in quiet homes and empty rooms, men like the old soldier lived on, unnoticed, uncelebrated, carrying weight no rank could measure. They didn't ask for recognition. They didn't speak of numbers. They just lived, and that, the Admiral now knew, was the truest form of courage. Because the most dangerous men aren't the ones who brag about what they've done. They're the ones who survived it and stayed silent.